The Witch Herself by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor, Chapter 9. Lynn slept very little that night. She wished, for one thing, that she had kept the chalk and brought it home with her. She would draw a circle around Judith's bed and Stevie's bed and around the bed in her parents' room. She would draw a circle around the whole house, in fact, and Marjorie's as well. She wished she could protect them all forever against the evil powers of the old woman, but she knew that even this would not save them from the evils in themselves. She was, in part, Dorola, a demon and mouse. Was Sevena, and who knows what names Mrs. Tuggle had given the spirits that resided in Judith and her mother and the Beasleys, and even little Stevie. Everyone had a second side to his nature, and it was these second selves that Mrs. Tuggle made it a point to get to know. Even if the trip to the old house hadn't produced anything really useful, it did help to know just how Mrs. Tuggle operated. About 2 o'clock in the morning it began to rain, hard. Lynn lay between sleep and wakefulness. She remembered thinking once that even if she had drawn a circle around the house, a rain like this one would wash it away. It was the kind of rain one expects in the spring, a heavy rain for 15 or 20 minutes, gradually tapering off into mist. But this rain did not taper, and by 3 o'clock it seemed heavier still, accompanied by fierce winds that shook the third-floor bedroom where she and Judith were sleeping. "Lynn," came Judith's sleepy voice from behind the curtain that separated their spaces. "It sounds as though the house is coming apart. Listen to those shutters banging." "Mommy," came Stevie's voice. And then there were footsteps downstairs that told Lynn the whole family was awake. She put on her Angora slippers and her terry cloth robe and went downstairs with Judith. Mother had Stevie in her arms and was taking him into the kitchen for some hot chocolate, and when they were all seated around the table, Father, too, came down in his floppy leather sandals. "Listen to that hail," he said, as the storm pelted the roof of the back porch. He opened the door and peered out into the night. Every now and then there was a ripping sound and splitting of tree limbs. "The yard is going to be a sight tomorrow," he said, closing the door again. "This is about the worst thunderstorm I can remember." "There was one last fall," Mother reminded him. "Remember when part of Mrs. Tuggle's roof came off?" Lynn remembered. It was the night she and Marjorie had been alone at the Beasleys. "The weather seems to be changing," Mother went on. We didn't used to get storms like this in Indiana. It sounds like some old wolf is out there huffing and puffing. And trying to blow the house down," Stevie said, blowing the marshmallow back and forth over the surface of his cocoa. "Can I sleep in your bed, Daddy?" "No," Father smiled, "but you may keep your door open and we'll hear you if you need anything." The wind died down around 4, but the rain continued dull and steady, with occasional rumbles of thunder in the distance. The family returned to bed. Maybe the worst is over, Lynn thought, not really thinking of the storm. Everything had seemed so normal back downstairs. Mother had been more like herself. The warm smell of cocoa had been soothing. Maybe now that Mother would be writing at home, Mrs. Tuggle would realize she'd better leave the Morleys alone. Maybe she'd move away even. That would be better yet. Lynn dropped off to sleep, but about 7 o'clock she was awakened by someone knocking on the back door. She could hear her father moving about in his room below. She sat up, listened to the footsteps on the stairs, then got up and crept downstairs herself. Father had opened the back door to Mr. Beasley, who was standing there in his old plaid jacket. "Sorry to get you up so early this morning, Dick, but I found something you'd be interested in," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "Went out in my backyard this morning to see what damage the storm had done, and looking out across the field I could see where that big oak on the hill in the old cemetery had been uprooted and fallen down. I went over to take a look and found a skeleton half out of the ground. When the tree was uprooted, it made a deep hole in the earth and brought the Pritchard boys' grave with it. With all this talk going on about the missing death certificate, I think we ought to call the sheriff. Maybe he'll want to have the skeleton examined." "Glad you came by," Father told him. "I'll get dressed and be out in a few minutes." Lynn sat around the corner on the bottom step listening. So there really had been a body. There went her theory about Mrs. Tuggles turning her brother into a demon cat. Now she didn't know what to think. Mr. Morley came around the corner and almost stepped on her. "Good grief, Lynn, what are you doing up so early?" "I'll bet you heard everything Mr. Beasley said." Lynn nodded. "I'm going with him to get the sheriff," he told her. "When Mother wakes up, tell her where I've gone. I have a notion the sheriff will take the skeleton over to the state pathologist in Westburg. Lynn slowly dressed and went back downstairs to eat a bowl of cornflakes and a donut. If there was only a skeleton left, what could a pathologist find out? If there were no broken bones, no gashes on the skull, could a pathologist say that a person had not been murdered? It wouldn't really prove a thing. She felt depressed. The pathologist would say he found no evidence of violence. People would stop gossiping about Mrs. Tuggle, and she would be free to go right on working her witchcraft. Mouse came over before Mrs. Morley was awake, and the two girls sat on the glider out on the back porch, watching the swirling dark clouds out over Cowden's Creek, listening to the steady peal of thunder, like the roll of a drum, and talking about the skeleton of C.L. Pritchard and what would happen next. About 9 o'clock, Mother came downstairs and made some coffee for herself. Lynn told her where Father had gone. Judith was awake, too, and took Stevie to the library for story hour and a puppet show. Mouse and Lynn waited on the back porch for Father to come back. They were so intent on their talk and speculation that Lynn didn't even notice that Mother herself was getting ready to go outside, till she came out on the back porch in her raincoat. It was not just the fact that Mother was going out that bothered Lynn. It was the agitated way she moved from one side of the porch to the other, looking out over the fields, then going back in the kitchen to continue her restless pacing. I'm worried about her, Mouse, Lynn said finally. It's as though Mrs. Tuggle is calling her. Do you think she can do that? Send out vibrations or something from up there on the hill? As if in answer to the question, Mrs. Morley came out on the porch once more. Lynn, I simply must have the manuscript here if I'm to finish that book, she said. I've only one more paragraph to go, and I could finish it this weekend. I promised your father I'd write here at home, so I'm going up to Mrs. Tuggle's to get it. I'll be back shortly. Lynn sat frozen beside Mouse. The glider stopped rocking. I thought you told Dad you wouldn't go up there anymore, she said numbly. I said I wouldn't write there, and I'd like to know how I'm supposed to write here at home without my manuscript, Mother snapped. Besides, I need the exercise. We'll walk up with you then, Lynn offered. No, we won't, breathed Mouse, nudging her in the ribs. Lynn, we don't dare. Not after the trouble you girls got into last night, said Mother. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Promise you'll be right back then? Lynn asked. In time for lunch. Judith and Stevie should be back by 1, and I told them I'd make a pizza. You'll stay and have some with us, won't you, Marjorie? Sure, said Mouse, who never passed up an offer for food. Mother left, walking briskly up the hill toward the house at the top. The thunder continued. Now and then a flash of lightning streaked across the sky. Lynn watched her go with foreboding. Let's play duets, Mouse said, as if to take Lynn's mind off her fears. Mouse was behaving more and more like a capable adult herself. Lynn decided as she followed her into the music room. Marjorie seemed to be adjusting much better to the fact that she and her father made up their family now, and that her mother, however much Mouse loved her, would not be as big a part of her life as she had hoped. She made plans for meals, organized the housework, and sometimes helped her father out in his bookstore. She seemed proud now that she could recover from the shock of the divorce and go on to live a full and happy life, as full and happy, that is, as a life can be in the shadow of Elnora Tuggle. They sat down together on the piano bench. Mouse took the more complicated bass part, and Lynn took the treble. They went through Chopsticks and all the other songs they knew. Then they gave up because Lynn's heart simply wasn't in it. How long has she been gone, Mouse? Lynn asked finally. The clock on the bookcase read 11. About 40 minutes. How long does it take to walk up the hill, pick up a manuscript, and come home again? They're probably talking. She probably feels she at least has to be polite. Maybe. They sat together on the window seat and watched the strange zigzags of lightning. If it continued raining, the business district would probably flood again. Maybe it would even flood as badly as it had 40 years ago, when houses washed away, when Mrs. Tuggle's brother and Bertha Voigt and 2 other people had disappeared in the flood. Maybe people always disappeared when it rained. Maybe Mrs. Tuggle waited for a good storm to come along and then got rid of anyone who was in her way. Or maybe she took the opportunity to turn them into demon spirits and put the blame on the flood. Her heart thumped with anxiety again, and she looked at the clock. 11:15. Mother had been gone an hour. The phone rang, and she jumped. Hello? Hi, Lynn, this is Dad. Is Mother around? No, she should be back any minute. Tell her I won't be home for lunch. I decided to go over to Westburg with the sheriff. Something's come up. What did they find, Daddy? You might as well tell me because you know I'll find out anyway. There was a pause, then a sigh. You're right about that, Father said. Anyway, it'll be in tomorrow's paper, so it's no secret. Well, we've had something of a shock. The skeleton in the Pritchard boy's grave is not that of a boy at all, but of a young woman. We're checking the teeth, and we'll compare them with old dental records later to see if we can identify her that way. Lynn gasped. Bertha Voigt? She said at once. Who? Bertha Voigt. Have them check her dental records, Dad. I'll bet that's who it is. Who's she? Mr. Morley asked. How do you know that, Lynn? I'm not sure, Daddy. I know. She disappeared at the same time Mrs. Tuggle's brother did, and she and Mrs. Tuggle were sort of enemies. Oh, Dad, I'm sure Mrs. Tuggle must have killed her and buried her where her brother was supposed to be. Now listen. Father's voice seemed shaky itself. We're going to let the sheriff handle this, Lynn. I'll tell him what you said, but in the meantime, don't any of you go up to Mrs. Tuggle's. Do you hear? I want all of you to stay at home till I get there. Oh, Dad, Lynn gasped again. Mother's there. What? She went up to Mrs. Tuggle's an hour ago to get her manuscripts and bring it home. And she said she'd be right back, and she's not here. I'm coming home, Father said. It'll take 20 minutes or so, but I'm on my way. He hung up. Lynn discovered she was crying. Mouse, she said, and told her the news at once. We've got to go after Mother. If Mrs. Tuggle knows about the skeleton being found, she'll work her magic to keep the sheriff away, and she'll need Mother's help. Dad's so worried he's coming right home. Then let him take care of it, Lynn, Mouse begged. He'll know what to do. Mouse, don't you see? It may be too late. Mrs. Tuggle will know that it's the last time she'll have Mother up there alone. Whatever she's going to try, she'll try now. She could hold her as a sort of hostage. She could keep her there and tell the sheriff that if he sets foot in her yard, something would happen to Mother. I've got to go up there, Mouse, to get her. Lynn, she'll kill you. Mouse, please come with me. Wait outside behind the trees, and if I'm not out with Mother in 5 minutes, go get your father or the police or something. I'm frightened. So am I. And they threw on jackets and ran up the hill to the edge of the spruce trees. The sky was black and churning. It was like dusk, yet it was noon. The wind was growing stronger, and the lightning cracked down on them, as though it were demanding the very spot, The wind was growing stronger, and the lightning cracked down on them, as though it were demanding the very spot on which they stood. 5 minutes, then, said Mouse, as Lynn got down on her hands and knees and crawled along the fence toward the gate. I mean it, Lynn. If you're not back out by then, I'll go for the whole U.S. Army. It was useless, Lynn knew, to try to enter through a door. The doors would be locked now, and Mrs. Tuggle would certainly not let her in if she knocked. Somehow she had to get upstairs without the old woman knowing. She made her way on her hands and knees from bush to bush, stopping behind the thorn-apple tree to stand up and rub her knees, and then down on all fours again, ignoring the mud. Inch by inch she made her way along until at last she reached the outside steps that led up to the second-floor balcony, surrounding the 3 sides of the house, and climbed them. The floor at the top tilted slightly away from the house like a listing ship. It was easier to get down on her hands and knees again, to crawl along it, sticking close to the wall, so she would not be seen going past a window should Mrs. Tuggle be upstairs. The room where Mother worked was around on the other side, away from the steps. It was necessary first to crawl past the guest bedroom, then the sewing room, and finally turn the corner to arrive at the window of Mother's room. Down below, in the clump of spruce trees, Lynn could see Marjorie's anxious face looking up at her, and wished that Mouse would keep out of sight. If Mrs. Tuggle looked out and saw Mouse standing there looking upward, she would know that something was afoot. At last, she reached Mrs. Morley's room, and slowly, raised up, peeping in one corner of the window. Mother was sitting there tensely in her chair. She was still wearing her coat, the manuscript in her lap, looking distraught and frightened. Lynn tapped lightly on the glass and put one finger to her lips, then she pushed open the window. Mrs. Morley started, her lips parting, staring at Lynn as though not quite sure who she was. Lynn crawled in. Come on, Mother, she whispered. Father wants you to come home. I can't, Lynn. Mother said desperately, and her eyes looked half wild. I don't know why, but I can't seem to move out of this chair. I'm like the heroine in my story, trapped in the steeple of a crumbling church. I'm so frightened. Mother, you've got to come quickly. I'll help you. Crawl out the window with me. Mrs. Morley leaned forward as if to stand up, but suddenly slumped backward again. I can't, Lynn, she said, her voice trembling. I just can't. I'm trapped by my own words. It's as though the same spell I've been writing about has taken over me. Then write, Mother, Lynn pleaded. Write that she escaped. Just put down those words. Mother reached out and shakily picked up her pen. Her hand shook so that she could scarcely hold it, but somehow she managed to produce 6 words. And so Dorola let her go. Lynn gasped. That name! How could Mother know it? Somehow Mrs. Tuggle had controlled them all, even the book that Mother had been writing. The pen fell out of Mrs. Morley's hand and onto the desk, and Mrs. Morley stood up. Still, however, her other hand gripped the arm of the chair. I can't, Lynn, Mother said, again weeping. I can't seem to let go. Whatever is the matter with me? There was another crack of thunder. This time it was so loud that Lynn felt sure she had been hit. It was like an explosion that rocked the room. Yet when it was over, nothing seemed out of place. The room looked as it always had. Then she heard Mouse screaming from outside. Fire! Fire! At the same moment, she smelled smoke and heard a crackling noise. On the roof, lightning had hit the house. Mother, the house is on fire, Lynn said. Come on. I can't, Lynn. I can't let go. Run, Lynn. Get out while you can. Don't wait for me. Lynn knelt down beside her mother to see if she could work her fingers loose from the arm of the chair. As she did so, her knees scraped something sharp. She looked down. The cat's chain, the spider medallion, had been twisted around and around one rung. Swiftly, Lynn unwrapped it and flung it out the open window to the ground below. Instantly, her mother's fingers relaxed, and Mrs. Morley was able to move at last. The smoke became more dense, and the noise of the fire above them was becoming a roar. There were rapid footsteps on the stairs coming up. Lynn yanked her mother toward the window. Mrs. Morley climbed out, Lynn behind her, just as Mrs. Tuggle burst into the room. The old woman gave a shriek and lunged toward them, grasping at Lynn's coat. But Lynn jerked free and ran her mother around the balcony and down the side steps, just as a car pulled up in front and Father bounded out. No sooner had they reached the bottom than there was a sudden whoosh, like a gust of wind, and the whole upper story of the old house was engulfed in flames. Mr. Morley was holding Mother in his arms, and Lynn and Mouse crouched together behind them, their faces buried in their hands. They heard the sirens coming up the hill from the village below. They heard the roar of the trucks and the shouts of the firemen, the running of feet and the rushing of water. They heard the horrified voices of neighbors gathering out beyond the gate, and the crackling and falling of timber as bit by bit the old house caved in. When they at last forced themselves, white and shaken, to lift their heads and look, there was nothing left but the big stone fireplace where the parlor had once been, and ashes all around. The swollen water of Cowden's Creek had receded, leaving only a damp line along the bank. The fallen oak tree in the old cemetery had been hauled away by a maintenance crew, which was transferring all the coffins to their new location on the east side of town. But the other trees would be left standing. Picnic tables would take the place of tombstones when the spot became a wooded park for the whole town to enjoy. This particular Saturday, unlike the Saturday of the fire a month earlier, was calm and quiet, with large puffy clouds and a blue sky, daffodils in profusion, and a warmth in the air that meant jackets and coats were not needed. After 4 weeks of saying they would go back up there some day, Lynn and Mouse gathered up the courage to set out for the house on the hill, the place where the house had once been. Mr. Beasley was working in the bookstore. Judith had gone hiking with a boyfriend. Stevie was at a birthday party. Mr. Morley was washing the car, and Mother was baking bread and going over the details of a new book in her head. There would be no more books about witches. The manuscript, the one that Mrs. Morley had been working on for a year, had been left behind in Mrs. Tuggle's house and had burned along with the old woman who had inspired it. Lynn had thought that Mother would be devastated at the loss of a year's work, but Mrs. Morley seemed at peace for the first time in many months. I feel so different, she had told Father recently. What a terrible way for it all to end, and yet I am so glad to be rid of that book. I was possessed, Dick. It's as simple as that. It felt good to be going somewhere with Marjorie without being afraid, Lynn thought. Afraid of the demon cat that watched them from the bushes, or the crows overhead, or the quick form of Mrs. Tuggle bearing down on them swiftly from out of nowhere. The witchcraft that had affected them all in one way or another had been buried along with Mrs. Tuggle's bones 3 weeks ago. Mr. and Mrs. Beasley were not getting back together, however. Witchcraft may have been responsible for many things, but the Beasley divorce was not one of them. Life would have been very simple and decided if everything that went wrong could be blamed on witches, but you couldn't do that. There were problems inside people that would always cause trouble, whether Mrs. Tuggle was around to draw the evilness out or not. Witchcraft was not responsible for Lynn teasing Stevie or Mouse goofing up a piano lesson. There was still a real world to come back to even after the death of the old woman. The girls reached the clump of spruce trees in the corner of the now vacant lot, their tips still black and singed from the heat of the fire. The house was gone, of course, and the barn, and half the tractor shed. The hen house studio, where Mother once wrote, was black on one side, but otherwise all right. No one, however, had come up here since the fire, except the inspectors, and once they had searched the grounds and made their reports, they were happy to leave the charred remains to the field mice, which had moved in and claimed the old fireplace as their home. But Lynn knew she had to come. She had to walk over every inch of the place where the house had once stood. She had to recite the names of her own demon, Dorola, again and again to familiarize herself with it, so that it could never again creep up unexpectedly and take her by surprise. She had to be convinced finally and firmly that she, Lynn Morley, was in control of her life. "Well, this is it," Mouse said as they reached the edge of the charred wood that lay in heaps inside the foundation. They lowered themselves down into the open cellar where the rubble lay, and stood by the remains of the big furnace, remembering the last time they had stood there. How close they had both come, Dorola and Savannah, to giving in. Maybe if she had lived, she would have given up witchcraft eventually, Lynn said thoughtfully. People do change, you know. Maybe if it hadn't been for her fears about what might happen if they discovered the body of Bertha Voigt, she wouldn't have tried to start a coven and build up her cone of power. "I wouldn't be too sure," said Mouse. Remember that her brother was still hanging around as the demon cat. Of course, he was only a cat for a while. What do you suppose he was before that? A crow, a rat, an owl maybe? That's why his body was never found. She was always transforming it. They continued to walk around, turning over little bits of rubble with their shoes, a piece of a teacup, a curtain rod. "Does your father believe you now?" Mouse asked finally. Lynn looked at her. "Does yours?" They both smiled. "I guess they never will," said Mouse. "Daddy says that Mrs. Tuggle controlled a lot of people because they wanted to be controlled, that in one way or another they were ripe for it. My father doesn't even try to explain it," Lynn said. "He says he's glad we're all back again. That's what he told Mother last night." Suddenly, Lynn stopped and leaned over to look at something in the ashes. "Mouse, look here." It was the cat's chain with the spider medallion, charred and burnt almost beyond recognition. When Lynn picked it up, it fell apart in her hand. "This place gives me the creeps," Mouse said, shuddering. "Let's go." She turned and started climbing back over the rubble. Lynn started to follow, then stopped. Something else had caught her attention. Something that gleamed at her under a fallen beam. She knelt down. It was a green glass eye. She backed away, then returned, drawn to it, and repelled, both at the same time. She had always wondered why Mrs. Tuggle had one gray eye and one green one. This was all that was left of the old woman now. As she stared at it, the eye, for just a moment, seemed to wink at her. Lynn stood up and quickly ran after Mouse. When she got to the foundation wall, however, she turned. The eye winked again, one more time, and then went dull. Lynn crawled up the concrete blocks and hurried away. She did not look back at all. And that is the end of The Witch Herself. It is not the end of the series. Phyllis Reynolds Naylor returned to it almost 20 years later. And so you don't have to wait 20 years to hear more. You will hear more probably in October of 2026. I have really enjoyed discovering this series and reading it to you, and I'm looking forward to reading more of the books. And we will see you in the next read aloud.